Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys.
That's right. Big, giant Rubik Cube.
Yes.
The Rubik of all cubes.
Would you believe I did not get any Rubik's Cubes for Christmas? That's amazing.
What? Hey, you could probably make a Rubik's Cube out of all those Moravian cookies that you have.
Oh, yes, I consume quite a number of Moravian cookies. This is one of my favorite times of the year.
That's right.
For that purpose. Of course, I've got about 3 dozen Rubik's Cubes over there in my FAIRtax bag, so that's
right. Oh, you could actually write a piece of legislation. You can talk about the need for every American family to have the spice cookies, the Moravian spice cookies in their homes for general consumption and for other purposes.
Yes, I guarantee people who don't know what these are, they have no connection to Winston-Salem and have never had these.
Can I give a plug out to Wilkerson Bakery?
Sure. Why not?
WilkersonBakery.com. You can order it on what we're talking about online. And this was the guy, Dewey Wilkerson, who actually has probably the longest history in cooking Moravian baked goods, including cheese straws.
These are good, but I love the sugar cake.
Oh yeah! Did Andy happen to send you? Did your brother happen to send
Andy sent me some of the super thin ginger cookies.
Okay. Well, now I know what I need to go take care of because I've got that grocery list finished up. I just need to go out. I need to be able to get out of here and go do that. We're talking about Christmas, and we're at that time of year, and it's a time of giving. And boy, our Congress people have sure given it to us this year, haven't they?
Yes, the gift that keeps on giving, our congress.gov segment here that we do on FAIRtax Power Radio. We have been doing this just about all year through, just about every episode we've had, unless we've had a guest or, of course, the Wally's World, the one like we did last week. I really enjoy, being on with Jade. And in fact, I enjoy all of the FAIRtax Power Radio shows. But of course, my favorite segment is congress.gov. And we have accumulated, ladies and gentlemen, over the past year what we call our 2022 FAIRtax Power Radio Tax Reform Hall of Shame. These are proposals that we ran across in our various congress.gov segments. I was trying to look and see how many of them became law, but I haven't, not too many of them has as of this moment. I imagine the ones that will, they'll all get passed at the last minute. So
or an omnibus spending, when they do the budget, the omnibus spending bill, a lot of this stuff probably gets shoveled in, just plopped in there.
Yeah, and for other purposes. Yeah. And of course, this year's a little bit different with our tax proposal Hall of Shame here on FAIRtax Power Radio, because our leadoff hitter here on the Hall of Shame lineup is actually not a proposal. Unfortunately, this one did become law, and it is probably the granddaddy of all Hall of Shame entries. It's H.R. 5376, the Inflation Reduction Act. That one passed, and that one put a gargantuan increase in the IRS's budget. If that's not Hall of Shame worthy, nothing is.
Yeah. And it doesn't fight inflation. Inflation is a little bit lower, but it's still at 40-year highs right now. Mm-hmm. And it didn't reduce any of that. And more money went in, and that's the cause of inflation is there's too much money chasing too few goods. So congratulations to John Yarmouth from Kentucky 3. He was a sponsor, and so it was introduced actually back in September of 2021.
Yeah, well, that one got through. It's crazy. You think you've got I hear numbers from 12 to 14 billion dollars is the annual budget for the Internal Revenue Service, and this bill comes along, and that 12 to 14 becomes 80 plus. I mean, you have multiplied the size of that agency considerably. And what's funny is I don't know anybody other than maybe somebody that works there who likes the IRS. We're talking to Marissa Selvig. She came out and said, "I hate the IRS." And I said, "Well, you're not alone."
Well, I mean, it's like trying to turn the Titanic on a dime.
Yeah, he couldn't do that. You saw what happened to him.
Yeah, they couldn't make they didn't make it past that iceberg. But if we stay vigilant and keep pressure on Washington and find people who will carry the FAIRtax banner, not this banner, but the actual concept to Washington, and communicate with your elected officials, and find people in your neighborhood that might want to run for office and begin to talk about it. And it could be something that takes fire in your state.
Yeah, again, we've heard from several people, politicians, who have said it is much easier to elect FAIRtax people to begin with than it is to make FAIRtax people out of ones that are already up there.
No.
So that's there's your assignment, if you choose to accept it for the 2024 election cycle, is to find as many FAIRtax supporting candidates as you can, get behind them, and get them elected.
And write letters and talk to people in your community to get them understanding. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's just it's almost it's easier to do that than it is, and will help. It's easier to talk to people in your local community than it is sometimes to get these politicians to listen. But if enough of the constituents are out there with knowledge of a tax on consumption vis-a-vis the FAIRtax, then you're light years ahead. And man, there's a lot of people talking about, well, I need to pay attention to this. So it's kind of a two-step effort there. The thing I like about IRS Publication 17.
I'm saying, as editor-in-chief of the Hall of Shame document, in deference to you here, I have added your favorite publication from the Internal Revenue Service to this year's Hall of Shame. Have at it, my friend.
Well, it's an excerpt from Publication 17, which is, of course, the step-by-step guide for filling out your taxes, and lists all the forms and where they're supposed to go. And they're supposed to insert Form D in front of page 32, etc. My favorite is on page 76 of the 140-page document known as IRS Publication 17. You need something in the restroom when you're going in there to have a conference with yourself? Well, this is the book that you need to have with you. Stolen Property on page 76. If you steal property, you must report its fair market value in your income in the year you steal it, unless you return it to the rightful owner in the same year. Hey, buddy, I need to borrow your lawnmower, but I'm not going to tell you. It's going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to find your shed door open and me with a new lawnmower on my side of the street.
Yeah, now, run that by me one more time. Again, this is not a proposal. This is current law.
But this is in the very same area of this one is the part about the drugs. If you sell drugs, you need to report your drug sales on 1099. I guess it's not -NEC, non-employee compensation. It's right. 1099-drug or something like that, or steal. Stolen property. Again, page 76 of Publication 17. If you steal property, you must report its fair market value in your income in the year that you steal it, unless you return it to the rightful owner in the same year.
Folks, we have a tax system that expects criminals to report the proceeds of their illegal activities on their tax returns. How stupid is that? That has got to be the dumbest thing contained in anybody's tax code anywhere in the world. We need to rip it out by the roots without Novocaine and replace it with the FAIRtax.
This is the dumbest thing I've ever anywhere. I mean,
oh mercy, that's
really, Publication 17 gives you it is a legitimate document. And maybe somebody, I mean, I can't imagine the meeting when they were deciding to put that in there. Hey, what do you think about this? Let's put stolen property and drug sales in. Nobody's going for that. Yeah, let's put it in there and see what happens.
I wonder if anybody actually does. I guarantee there's nobody that does that. Oh, mercy. I mean, everything else we've got everything else in the rest of the Hall of Shame is going to pale in comparison to that. But let's go ahead and move on a little bit. This was HR 7547, the Space Act, SPACE, which in this case stands for Securing Protections Against Carbon Emissions Act, or the space tax. And what it is, it amends the Internal Revenue Code to impose excise taxes on passenger space travel. I kid you not.
To the moon.
Yes. Yes, yeah. The only one I remember was when they put William Shatner up, Captain Kirk from Star Trek in one of those. It didn't even go into orbit; it was just a little suborbital ride up into space and back down. But
he wasn't too thrilled. He wasn't too thrilled with it after he came back down. I think I've heard interviews that he wasn't all that excited about it.
Oh, I don't know.
But tax on. Oh my God! I'm going to tell you.
But that's incredibly expensive to begin with, and then they want to impose an excise tax on top of that. Reading from the text here, there is hereby imposed on the amount paid for taxable space transportation of any non-exempt person, which I guess is a real astronaut, a tax equal to 10% of the amount so paid. So
there's always a carve out.
So paid. So launch tax. There is hereby imposed on each taxable space launch a tax equal to $2 million if any portion of the intentional flight path of any passenger carrying portion of this vehicle is other than a suborbital trajectory. So if you're just going to go up and down, you don't get this $2 million tax. That's only $100,000 on your suborbital rides. But that's the space tax that they want to put in.
A passenger tax and a launch tax.
Yes, so that's it. That one's definitely in the Hall of Shame.
We're paying these people to think this stuff up. That's no, it's believable. Excuse me, it is believable.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one here.
HR 7849 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to allow a credit against tax for the purchase of certain adaptive gear required to prevent the entanglement of right whales.
Yes, how crazy is that? Well, I actually went back when we covered that one to begin with. There was not any text in it. I went back and looked at it. This bill is actually aimed at the lobstering industry. So if you're in the business of, picking lobsters out of the ocean, and the equipment you use to perform your business like that also manages to get these right whales, some state and some federal regulations are requiring these lobstering operations to buy I have no clue what kind of equipment it takes so that you don't get the right whales entangled in the lobstering equipment. But they'll say they'll give you a 30% reimbursement on the cost of whatever you buy to comply with these regulations to protect the right whales. Now, I wonder what they have against the humpback whales or the gray whales or the blue whales, or only the right whales get this protection.
Whales. They have to be the right whales. They can't be the wrong whales.
It's anyhow. But there we go. That was HR 7849 to get you a tax credit for preventing the entanglement of right whales. This one, I tell you what, this is another one of these. Let's use the tax code to enforce a political agenda here. HR 8051 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to impose an additional 1,000% excise tax on the sale of large capacity ammunition feeding devices and semi-automatic assault weapons, and of course, for other purposes.
Oh, well, there might be something that we didn't think about when we cooked up this mess in the first place.
So
Donald Byer, representative from Virginia District 8, had 36 co-sponsors believe this stuff.
All right. Well, proceed, my friend.
Yes, HR 8190 to amend the IRS of 1986, the code of 1986, to treat certain assisted reproduction expenses as medical expenses of the taxpayer.
And that is from Adam Schiff in California. And you look at that and says, what kind of help do you need here, fella?
Yeah, here, hand me that scalpel. That kind of assistance, maybe. I don't know.
No. You look at that. That's the stuff like in vitro fertilization, and how you can get stuff by other than the normal and natural means. Assisted reproduction expenses. Apparently, they are not qualified as deductible medical expenses now, and so this bill wants to change that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you stop and think about it. You made a comment a little earlier about the possibility of maybe some of these slide-ins to the tax code being dumped into an omnibus spending bill that's on page 3,622 that nobody will ever see, but it's in there, and now it helps whoever was lobbying for it in the first place. Crazy.
Okay. This okay. Yours is the next one. Go ahead.
All right. This is a Senate bill, S 4568, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to promote the increased use of renewable natural gas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful transportation-related emissions that contribute to poor air quality, and to increase job creation and economic opportunity throughout the United States. Our esteemed retiring North Carolina Senator Richard Burr introduced in the middle of the summer, one co-sponsor along with him. Congratulations, Senator
If
Burr.
you ever see him, will you ask him a question for me?
Yeah.
What the heck does that have to do with collecting the government money it needs?
I'll put that down right here. I don't know that I'll see him because he's probably going to retire and stay in Washington as a lobbyist. But I don't know that. I'm just
that's a whole different
that's a
different subject to get into. But I looked at that and says renewable natural gas. Now I thought natural gas was one of those fossil fuels that they want to get rid of and replace it with renewable energy. I didn't know that fossil fuels could be renewable.
Well, if you take the word renewable and you consider natural gas, and what are you renewing about natural gas? It gets collected and then sent for the processing and then is available for use. What's renewable about it? Can you recapture it at some point?
I don't. If I remember right, I think I looked that up at the time this one came up, and I don't remember what exactly renewable natural gas is. But
it's just a lot of mumbo jumbo. We just throw these words out there, and yeah, boy.
Then again, if you're trying to promote the increased use of renewable natural gas, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful transportation and related emissions, why are you looking in the tax code to do that?
Right.
That needs to be jerked out by the roots without Novocaine and replaced with a fair tax.
That's the bottom line. You're going to cause a run on Novocaine. You know that, don't you?
Oh, well, I tell you what, if I never have to have any more, I'll be happy, but you never can tell.
That's what we need to do. We need to send a bag of teeth and a wrench up there to our congressman. This is going to be in the mouth when we're done.
Yeah, that's what Novocaine is, one of those things that you hope you never need, but if you really need it, you're glad it's there.
Glad you have it. That's exactly right.
Whatever. Now, here's another one from North Carolina. If I'm not mistaken, this gentleman was not reelected, Madison Cawthorn from North Carolina 11.
Primaried out.
Yeah, he introduced H.R. 8399 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to repeal the National Firearms Act. You remember talking about that?
Yes.
It was said, what in the world does the Internal Revenue Internal Revenue Code have to do with the National Firearms Act? That sounds like an entirely separate piece of legislation, until we learned that the National Firearms Act is incorporated into the Internal Revenue Code. Do you believe that?
Oh, I believe. Hey, this type of stuff, you can't write this. You can't make it up. You know, you got time to write an episode for a TV show. Maybe we need to talk to Dick Wolf about a new series instead of FBI. It's IRS.
Well, I want to replace the IRS with the fair tax, so that's good. But the idea that what was apparently at one time anyway a separate piece of legislation, the National Firearms Act, was incorporated into the Internal Revenue Code, and now I guess it's there are a lot of folks that would think it's a good idea to get rid of that National Firearms Act, and Madison Cawthorn is trying to do that. But what the heck is that doing in the tax code to begin with?
Right. I would think that, and maybe it slipped in whenever it was enacted into an omnibus bill that started out as one of these these entries in the tax code.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I created this document in kind of chronological order.
Yes.
But since skip one, go down to the next one because it is a kind of related subject matter.
Okay, righto. HR 9033, Clyde Andrews, representative from Georgia 9, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to remove short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and certain other weapons from the definition of firearms for purposes of the National Firearms Act and for other purposes.
Again, the National Firearms Act is part of the Internal Revenue Code, and now they want to, or at least Representative Clyde here wants to remove short barrel. Now, how come short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and other weapons are no longer considered firearm? I thought a firearm was something, or you touched off an explosion with some kind of gunpowder and it projected a projectile down the barrel of your weapon and hopefully hit what you were aiming at. How is that? How are these short barrel rifles not firearms under the classic definition of what a firearm is?
Well, it seems that there are several steps in making sure that the tax code is precise. I know the tax code and precise words don't go together somehow, but where you are going to the National Firearms Act is there. So now we're putting this little line in here that's going to basically trigger the removal of those rifles and shotguns, those short-barreled rifles and shotguns, and certain other weapons, which of course will have to be named later and for other purposes. But I think what happens is you write in this little snippet, and it goes into an omnibus bill and gets written into law. It goes into the tax code. So now everything filters to the National Firearms Act. And now we've got this line in there that changes the definition just like that.
Well, this looks like something to remove Fords, Hyundais, and Toyotas from the definition of cars. That just makes no sense.
I can't imagine that you would want to call a car something other than what it is.
All right. Oh, mercy. All right. Let's move on here. HR 9130 to amend the internal. This was the one when I first read it. I had to read it 3 or 4 times and say, what in the heck is this saying? To amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to extend the exemption from the excise tax on alternative motorboat fuels sold as supplies for vessels or aircraft to include certain vessels serving only one coast. Huh? You got that?
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh, mercy.
Why? Is it has something to do with smog related issues on the West Coast versus the East Coast? I don't know. I don't understand that.
I don't know. If I'm reading this right, it sounds like that certain vessels or aircraft get this exemption from an excise tax, but only if you serve both coasts. Or in case of Florida, there's 2 coasts here. So Florida East Coast, Florida West Coast, then the Pacific Coast. We go. I remember a National Airlines ad one time say, "We fly from coast to coast to coast," because they were Florida based.
Yeah,
that has nothing to do with it. But anyhow, I'm just saying
because there are a lot of coasts.
They're going to say if your vessel or aircraft only serves one coast, that Representative John Garamendi of California wants to extend the exemption from an excise tax to those particular. And I wonder how come you use motorboat fuel in an aircraft?
Hey,
can you explain that one, Kimosabe?
Fuel is fuel. It depends on the stroke of the engine, I would think. 2-stroke or 4.
Oh, well, I'm a lot of things, but a mechanic ain't one of them, so I can't.
Sometimes you have oil in the, for 2-stroke, you can have oil and gas mixed in. It's not, it's not viscous, like oil, but it does do the lubrication work within the 2-stroke motor, like a weed eater or something like that. All right, moving along.
Yes, go ahead.
Water Protection Act of 2022, the Domestic Water Protection Act of 2022, HR 9194, had one co-sponsor. It was October of this year, In general, subchapter D of chapter 32 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by inserting after part 1 the following new part. Make sure you have your pens ready, folks, to write this down. Okay. Section 4171, imposition of tax. A, in general, there is hereby imposed a tax on the sale of any specified water-intensive crop by a manufacturer, producer, or importer thereof of a tax of 300% of the price for which item is sold. B, persons liable for tax, the manufacturer, producer, or importer referred to in subsection A shall be liable for the tax imposed by such subsection. Section 3, regulations. The Secretary shall promulgate regulations for application of this section in a manner consistent with international trade agreements. So now you have to go over to a whole nother book and figure it out. But I'm not going to read the definitions. I mean,
they're basically saying if you're trying to grow these water-intensive crops in an area that is experiencing a drought, they're going to tax you. There's only one problem. They're talking about taxing food that people need. You're going to stop growing food if rather than pay the tax? Come on.
Yeah, the term water-intensive crop means a crop grown in an area experiencing prolonged drought at the time that such a crop is grown. Hey, you just get a nice long hose from the hardware store and roll it across the,
All right, we got 3 left and not a whole lot of time left.
Yeah,
so let's skip through these last 3 pretty quick. HR 9246, the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to disallow the deduction of certain expenses relating to ownership of single-family homes by specified large investors, to impose an excise tax on the sale of such home by such investors, to establish the neighborhood homes tax credit, and to prohibit federal mortgage assistance relating to certain large investors. If you're a large investor and you own several single-family homes, they want to take away the deductions that normal people get in relation with owning their home. So that's Representative Ro Khanna of California.
Being successful in business is not good.
Okay, we talked about this one a little bit earlier. Go to the next one, 9299.
Stop Subsidizing Childhood Obesity Act. It's HR 9299. To amend the code to protect children's health by denying any deduction for advertising and marketing directed at children to promote the consumption of food of poor nutritional quality. By who?
I went back later because this wasn't in there when we first got it, and looked into the text and says now, not later than 24 months after the date of this, the secretary, and I'm not sure what secretary it's referring to, in consultation with the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Federal Trade Commission, shall promulgate such regulations as may be necessary to carry out the purposes of this thing. That includes coming up with definitions of directed at children, what the definition of poor nutritional quality is, and what brand primarily associated with food of poor nutritional. So they're just going to pass this bill and then say to the regulators, all right, you write out the specifics of it. Isn't that a wonderful way to do business?
Well, lawmakers keep their hands off of the process by which government works. They keep it very nebulous. They're not in detail. Leave it up to the bureaucrats to determine what it is they're trying to say. And that's the challenge, not only in tax code laws that affect the tax code, but in general, in legislation in general. That's where a lot of confusion comes, and bills and laws in Congress that Congress approves and the president signs end up at one of the courts debating its constitutionality or debating its legitimacy based on the interpretation of the bureaucrat who has to sit there and go, what did they mean by this? How are we supposed to move forward? So, stay out of the tax code, guys and gals.
One more here. This is the one we saw a couple of weeks ago and just added it, the S 5222, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to support upgrades at existing hydroelectric dams in order to increase clean energy production, improve the resiliency and reliability of the United States electric grid, enhance the health of the nation's rivers and associated wildlife habitats, and for other purposes. You cannot have a tax code without that in there. I tell you what. So
You might have forgotten.
we have fun with this all year, and we're going to do it again next year. I mean, next year starts a whole new Congress. Notice that we did not have the definition of municipal solid waste here. That was actually introduced last year.
That's right.
In this Congress.
That'll be in the top 100 of all time.
We'll probably see that one again when the new Congress convenes and we start this process all over again. So hope you've enjoyed our little tongue-in-cheek look at the Hall of Shame for tax proposals. Realize the serious purpose behind it is to say, we don't need this system. It needs to be jerked out by the roots without Novocaine and replaced with the fair tax. That's what we're doing all about it. Get rid of the income tax, get rid of all this junk, and then we can just have a much simpler, much easier, much fairer tax system that has much less adverse impact on our economy, by the way. And that is going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. We've run a bit long here, but it was worth it. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FairTax Guys, providing you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you will demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid. Also, any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, I mean, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, well, it's all right here.